The sky above the battlefield was a chaotic canvas of shifting colors, painted in hues of emerald plasma streaks and crimson explosions. The ground trembled as alien machinery roared across the war-torn plains of Kartha 9, a distant mining colony turned death trap in the war against the Zarthish, a ruthless alien race intent on eradicating humanity from the stars. Amidst the carnage, Lieutenant Alara Quinn sprinted across a field littered with charred debris and fallen soldiers, her combat boots sinking into the blackened mud. Overhead, the alien ships hovered like predatory birds, raining destruction on the remnants of Earth's forces. The once mighty resistance had been reduced to scattered pockets of survivors, their morale shattered and their supplies dangerously low. It was only a matter of time before the colony fell. "Quinn, get your ass over here!" shouted Captain Darius Ward, his gruff voice barely audible over the cacophony of battle. He stood behind a makeshift barricade, his cybernetic arm glinting in the dim light. Despite the chaos around him, Darius exuded an air of unshakable authority, his steely gaze locking onto Alara as she slid into cover beside him. "Status report," Darius barked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Bad," Alara replied, panting. "We've lost the west perimeter. The Zarthish are pressing us from all sides. If we don't get reinforcements..." "Reinforcements?" Darius cut her off with a bitter laugh. "HQ's radio silence speaks volumes. We're on our own." As if to punctuate his grim assessment, a Zarthish walker, a towering monstrosity of spindly legs and pulsating alien energy, emerged from the haze, its elongated cannons swiveling toward their position. Ilara's heart sank as she clutched her rifle tighter, knowing their small arms were no match for the beast. Before she could issue a warning, a sudden, deafening roar tore through the battlefield. A massive, heavily armored dropship plummeted from the sky, crashing into the ground with earth-shaking force. It skidded to a halt mere meters from the Zarthish walker, the symbol of Earth's forgotten past, a coiled serpent devouring its tail, emblazoned on its hull. The air shimmered as the ship's cargo bay doors hissed open, revealing a sight so bizarre, so utterly unexpected, that Alara momentarily forgot the impending doom bearing down on them. A group of human soldiers emerged, but these were unlike any troops she had ever seen. They were hulking figures clad in mismatched armor, their faces obscured by helmets adorned with crude insignias, jagged scars, and what appeared to be graffiti. One soldier held a weapon that looked suspiciously like a souped-up chainsaw, while another wielded what could only be described as a flamethrower modified to shoot some kind of molten blue plasma. The leader of the group, a towering figure with a patch over one eye and a permanent scowl etched into his helmet, stepped forward and casually hefted an enormous railgun onto his shoulder. He surveyed the battlefield with a kind of bored detachment, as though he were assessing a particularly uninspired training simulation. Then, without warning, he raised the railgun and fired. The projectile streaked through the air, colliding with the Zarthish walker in a brilliant explosion that tore the alien machine apart, leaving nothing but smoldering wreckage in its wake. Alara and Darius exchanged incredulous glances as the leader turned to face them. His voice, amplified by his helmet speaker, was deep and gravelly, carrying an air of supreme confidence. "Name's Commander Rex," he announced. "We're the Black Reavers. HQ sent us to clean up this mess. Try to keep up." For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause, as if the universe itself needed a moment to process the absurdity of the situation. Then the fighting resumed with renewed intensity, the Black Reavers charging into the fray with an almost reckless enthusiasm. Alara watched in stunned silence as the newcomers unleashed a level of destruction that bordered on comical. One soldier fired a rocket launcher at a Zarthish gunship, missing entirely, only for the projectile to ricochet off a nearby rock and hit the ship's fuel tank, sending it spiraling into the enemy's ranks. Another soldier used a gravity-enhanced sledgehammer to send a Zarthish warrior flying into orbit. Darius broke the silence, muttering under his breath, "Ruthless? More like lunatics." Alara wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. "Who are these guys?" she asked. "Mercenaries," Darius replied, his tone laced with disdain. The kind HQ calls when they're desperate enough to throw every rulebook out the window. As the battle raged on, Ilara couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the Black Reavers and Earth's disciplined military forces. The mercenaries operated with a chaotic, almost anarchic energy, improvising weapons and tactics on the fly. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of, their unorthodox methods, they were astonishingly effective. Within minutes, they had turned the tide of the skirmish, forcing the Zarthish to retreat, if only temporarily. When the dust finally settled, Commander Rex approached Ilara and Darius, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over them. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that was as rugged and battle-scarred as his armor. His one good eye glinted with a mix of amusement and something darker, something primal. "Looks like you could use a hand," Rex said, his tone almost mocking. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll make sure your little colony survives long enough for HQ to send the cleanup crew." Ilara bristled at his condescension but bit her tongue. They needed all the help they could get, no matter how unorthodox or insufferable that help might be. Darius, however, was less inclined to play nice. "We didn't ask for your help," he said, his voice cold. "And we sure as hell don't need your attitude." Rex smirked, unfazed by the captain's hostility. "Relax, old man. We're on the same side. For now." Before Darius could respond, a crackling sound interrupted them. Ilara glanced at her comms device, startled to see a message from HQ, the first in days. She quickly patched it through, her heart sinking as the voice on the other end delivered grim news. "This is General Callahan. Reinforcements are delayed indefinitely. The Zarthish fleet is advancing on Earth, and all resources are being diverted to planetary defense. Cartha 9 is officially designated expendable. Godspeed, soldiers." The transmission cut off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Ilara felt a cold pit of dread settle in her stomach. They were truly alone. Rex, however, seemed unfazed. "Expendable, huh?" he said, his smirk widening. "Sounds like a challenge." Darius glared at him. "This isn't a game." "Sure it is," Rex replied, slinging his railgun over his shoulder. "And we're about to rewrite the rules." As the mercenaries began fortifying their position, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival was both a blessing and a curse. The Black Reavers had saved them, for now. But at what cost? For better or worse, the war for Cartha 9 had just taken a turn no one could have anticipated. And as Ilara watched the mercenaries work with an unsettling mix of precision and madness, she couldn't help but wonder whether they were humanity's salvation, or its undoing. The first rays of Cartha 9's crimson dawn bled across the battlefield, painting the smoldering wreckage in hues of fire and despair. The brief respite granted by the Black Reavers' arrival had been little more than a pause in the Zarthish onslaught. Their forces had regrouped overnight, and the eerie hum of alien war machines reverberated through the air. The battle was far from over. Ilara Quinn leaned against a shattered pillar, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, obscuring the Zarthish formations assembling in the distance. Her muscles ached, her mind racing with grim possibilities. The Black Reavers had brought chaos to the battlefield, but with that chaos came unpredictability. Could they truly be trusted? Behind her, the Reavers had turned the remnants of an abandoned supply depot into a temporary stronghold. Their methods were as unconventional as the soldiers themselves. One mercenary, a wiry man with a wild shock of red hair, was rigging together a makeshift mortar using scavenged Zarthish technology and what appeared to be the gutted remains of a coffee machine. Another Reaver, a woman whose bionic arm bristled with weaponry, was sketching incomprehensible diagrams into the dirt. Commander Rex sat atop a crate, sharpening an enormous combat knife. The steady scrape of metal on whetstone set Ilara's teeth on edge. She approached him, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "Commander," she said, keeping her tone neutral, "the Zarthish are mobilizing. We need a strategy." Rex didn't look up. Strategy's simple. Sweetheart. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we don't stop until there's nothing left to hit. Ilara suppressed a sigh. That's not a strategy, that's a death wish. The Zarthish outnumber us 10-1. If we don't play this smart, we're all going to die. Rex finally glanced up, his single eye narrowing. Smart doesn't win wars, Lieutenant. Guts do. Before Ilara could argue, Captain Darius Ward strode into the conversation, his cybernetic arm gleaming in the morning light. He was flanked by 2 of the colony's surviving officers, their faces grim. Enough, Darius growled. We don't have time for this macho posturing. We need a real plan, and we need it now. Rex smirked, unfazed. Fine. Here's the plan. We create chaos. Disrupt their lines, sabotage their supply chains, force them to spread thin. While they're scrambling to respond, we punch through their weakest point and take out their command center. Ilara frowned. And where exactly is their command center? Rex's grin widened. That's what we're about to find out. The first phase of Rex's plan involved a daring raid on a Zarthish outpost, located deep within enemy territory. The outpost was a hub of activity, bristling with alien guards and strange, organic-looking machinery. It was the kind of target that any sane military commander would avoid at all costs. But the Black Reavers weren't sane. Under the cover of darkness, the Reavers moved with surprising stealth, their mismatched armor blending into the jagged terrain. Ilara and Darius trailed behind them, their skepticism palpable. Rex led the group, his railgun slung casually over one shoulder. This is suicide, Darius muttered, his voice barely audible over the faint hum of Zarthish energy fields. Relax, Rex whispered back, flashing a wolfish grin. You've got the best of the worst on your side. The team reached the perimeter of the outpost without incident. Rex raised a fist, signaling a halt. He pointed to the nearest guard tower, where a Zarthish sentry loomed, its insectoid features illuminated by an eerie green glow. Ilara, Rex said, his tone all business now. You're up. Ilara hesitated. What do you mean, I'm up? Rex gestured to her sniper rifle. Take the shot. Ilara's stomach churned. She had trained for situations like this, but training was a far cry from the real thing. The Zarthish were terrifyingly alien, their bodies encased in chitinous armor, their movements unervingly fluid. She steadied her breathing, aimed down the scope, and squeezed the trigger. The sentry crumpled without a sound. Rex gave her a nod of approval. Nice shot. Now let's move. The team infiltrated the outpost with ruthless efficiency. The Reavers worked in perfect unison, their chaotic energy tempered by years of experience. One soldier hacked into the outpost's communication network, downloading critical intel. Another planted explosives on key infrastructure points. Meanwhile, Rex led the charge, cutting down any Zarthish who got in their way. Ilara found herself reluctantly impressed. Despite their unorthodox methods, the Reavers were undeniably effective. She even caught herself enjoying the adrenaline rush of the raid, until everything went sideways. A shrill, alien wail pierced the air as the Zarthish activated their alarms. Within seconds, the outpost was swarming with enemies. The Reavers responded with characteristic ferocity, unleashing a torrent of firepower. Ilara and Darius joined the fray, their weapons blazing. Time to go, Rex shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He activated his comms, relaying orders to his team. Reavers, fall back to the rendezvous point. Detonate on my mark. The team fought their way out of the outpost, the alien forces hot on their heels. Explosions erupted behind them as the Reavers' charges detonated, engulfing the outpost in flames. Ilara risked a glance over her shoulder, her heart pounding. The destruction was breathtaking, but the Zarthish were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. The group reached the extraction point, where a stolen Zarthish transport awaited them. The Reavers piled in, Rex taking the pilot's seat. As the ship lifted off, Ilara slumped against the wall, her chest heaving. "That was insane," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Rex turned to her, his grin undimmed. "And yet, here we are. Alive and kicking." Back at the stronghold, the intel retrieved from the outpost revealed a critical piece of information: the location of the Zarthish command center. It was buried deep beneath the surface, protected by layers of alien technology and an army of guards. Taking it out would be the key to crippling the Zarthish offensive. But the mission was daunting, even by Reaver standards. The command center was surrounded by impenetrable defenses, including a massive energy shield powered by a network of generators scattered across the battlefield. Disabling the shield would require a coordinated effort, and a level of trust that was in short supply. "We'll need to split into teams," Rex said during the strategy meeting. "One team to take out the generators, another to infiltrate the command center." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "And let me guess, you're taking the more suicidal mission?" Rex chuckled. "Of course. Wouldn't be any fun otherwise." Despite her misgivings, Ilara couldn't deny the logic of the plan. The Reavers were the best shot they had at dismantling the shield, while her own team was better suited for the delicate task of infiltrating the command center. As preparations got underway, Ilara found herself reflecting on the strange alliance that had formed between the colony's soldiers and the Black Reavers. Despite their differences, they shared a common goal: survival. But as the stakes grew higher, so too did the risks. And with the Zarthish closing in, failure was not an option. The next morning, as the two teams prepared to deploy, Rex approached Ilara. For once, his cocky demeanor was subdued. "Listen," he said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "I know you don't trust me. Hell, I wouldn't trust me either. But we're in this together now. So let's make it count." Ilara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Let's." As the teams set off into the unknown, the weight of the mission pressed down on them all. The fate of Cartha 9, and perhaps humanity itself, hung in the balance. And as Ilara glanced back at the smoldering battlefield, she couldn't shake the feeling that the chaos was only just beginning. The skies over Cartha 9 were alive with violence. Zarthish warships loomed in the heavens, their energy cannons casting down streaks of plasma that scorched the earth. The Black Reavers and the colony's surviving soldiers had begun the mission to dismantle the Zarthish command center's shield network, and every second of delay felt like a death sentence. Ilara Quinn crouched behind a twisted mass of alien debris, her breathing shallow. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal, mingled with the coppery tang of blood. Her team had just taken out the first generator, but the explosion had drawn attention. Zarthish forces were closing in, their guttural cries echoing through the ravaged landscape. "Quinn!" Captain Darius Ward's voice cut through her haze of fear. "We need to move now." Ilara tightened her grip on her rifle and nodded. She signaled to her team, a ragtag mix of colony soldiers and Black Reavers, to follow. Among them was Vega, a Reaver with a cybernetic eye that pulsed faintly in the gloom, and Ortiz, a grizzled demolitions expert who carried a bandolier of explosives like trophies. They sprinted across the battlefield, keeping low to avoid detection. Overhead, alien drones buzzed like angry hornets, their scanning beams slicing through the haze. Each second felt like an eternity as they navigated the deadly terrain. "Second generators just ahead," Vega said, her voice distorted slightly by her helmet's comm system. "But we've got company." Ilara followed Vega's gaze and cursed under her breath. A squad of Zarthish warriors stood guard around the generator, their insectoid forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. They were larger than the rank-and-file soldiers, their chitinous armor reinforced with spiked plating. Darius stepped forward, his cybernetic arm whirring as he readied his weapon. "We don't have time for subtlety. We hit them hard and fast." "Agreed," Ilara said. "Ortiz, you're on the generator. The rest of us will cover you." Ortiz grinned, his teeth gleaming white against his soot-streaked face. "My kind of job." The battle that followed was short but brutal. The Zarthish warriors moved with terrifying speed, their serrated blades carving through the air. Ilara fired in controlled bursts, her shots finding weak points in their armor. Vega's precision was deadly, her cybernetic eye giving her an almost preternatural aim. Darius, a whirlwind of steel and fury, tore through the aliens with his augmented strength. By the time the last warrior fell, Ortiz was already setting charges on the generator. The air crackled with tension as he worked, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Charges are set," Ortiz announced. "Clear the area." The team retreated to a safe distance just as the explosives detonated. The generator erupted in a fiery cascade, sending a shockwave rippling through the ground. For a brief moment, Ilara felt a flicker of hope. 2 down, 1 to go. Meanwhile, miles away, Commander Rex and his team were deep in the heart of the Zarthish Command Center. The facility was a labyrinth of organic architecture, its walls pulsating with an otherworldly glow. The air was thick with the scent of alien chemicals, and the sound of chittering voices echoed through the corridors. Rex led the charge, his railgun slung across his back. The Reavers moved like shadows, their mismatched armor blending into the dim light. Among them was Scythe, a silent giant armed with a gravity hammer, and Twitch, a wiry demolitions expert whose erratic movements belied his lethal precision. "We're close," Rex muttered, consulting a holographic map projected from his wrist device. "The core's just ahead," Twitch cackled. "Good. I was starting to get bored." As they approached the core, the resistance intensified. Zarthish guards poured into the corridors, their weapons spitting green plasma. The Reavers responded with their usual flair, turning the narrow passageways into a killing ground. Scythe's hammer sent enemies flying, while Twitch's explosives reduced entire squads to ash. Rex fought with brutal efficiency, his railgun punching through the alien ranks. But even he couldn't ignore the mounting casualties. The Zarthish were adapting, their tactics growing more coordinated with each encounter. "Rex," Scythe rumbled, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. "We're running out of time." "I know," Rex snapped. He glanced at his remaining troops, their numbers dwindling. "We push forward. No turning back now." They reached the core, a massive pulsating structure that radiated an intense heat. It was surrounded by a field of energy that shimmered like liquid glass. Twitch approached it, his movements jittery with excitement. "This is it," Twitch said, his voice tinged with awe. "The command hub. Give me 5 minutes, and I'll make sure this place goes out with a bang." "Make it 3, Rex replied, scanning the room for threats. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the air. The Zarthish weren't going to let them destroy the core without a fight. "Hold them off," Rex ordered, his railgun snapping to life. "Twitch, do your thing." The Reavers formed a defensive line, their weapons blazing. The Zarthish came in waves, their attacks relentless. Scythe fought like a man possessed, his hammer smashing through alien bodies. Rex fired until his railgun overheated, then switched to a plasma blade, carving through the enemy with savage precision. Twitch worked furiously, his fingers flying over a console. "Almost there," he shouted. "Better hurry," Rex growled, his voice strained. A Zarthish warrior lunged at him, its blade narrowly missing his throat. He retaliated with a swift strike, the plasma blade slicing through its carapace. Finally, Twitch let out a triumphant laugh. "Done. Time to go." The Reavers began their retreat, fighting every step of the way. Twitch's charges detonated behind them, engulfing the core in a fiery explosion. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, and for a moment, Rex's world was nothing but heat and light. Back at the surface, Ilara and her team had taken out the final generator. The shield protecting the command center flickered, then collapsed in a cascade of sparks. A cheer went up among the colony's soldiers, but Ilara felt no relief. They had succeeded, but at what cost? "Rex's team is still inside," Darius said, his expression grim. Ilara activated her comms, her voice urgent. Rex, do you copy? The shield's down. Are you clear? Static answered her. Then, after an agonizing pause, Rex's voice crackled through the comms. We're alive, but we've got a hell of a tail. Get those guns ready. We're coming in hot. True to his word, Rex's team emerged from the command center moments later, pursued by a swarm of Zarthish warriors. The colony's soldiers opened fire, covering the Reavers as they sprinted toward the extraction point. The battle reached its crescendo as the remaining forces clashed. Ilara fought with everything she had, her rifle barking out bursts of fire. Darius was a force of nature, his cybernetic arm a blur of motion. The Reavers, battered but unbroken, fought with their trademark ferocity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Zarthish began to retreat. The battlefield fell silent, save for the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Ilara slumped to the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. Rex approached her, blood streaking his face. Despite his injuries, he wore a grin. Told you we'd rewrite the rules, he said. Ilara managed a weak smile. You're insane. And you're welcome. For a moment, there was no war, no death. Only the fragile camaraderie of survivors. But Ilara knew the fight wasn't over. The command center was gone, but the Zarthish fleet still loomed above. The final battle was yet to come. The night over Cartha 9 was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes before a storm. The Zarthish fleet loomed in the skies, their massive ships casting shadows over the decimated landscape. Despite the destruction of their command center, the aliens were regrouping, their relentless hunger for victory undeterred. Humanity's forces, dwindling and exhausted, stood on the precipice of annihilation. Lieutenant Ilara Quinn gazed at the horizon from the colony's makeshift command post, her heart heavy. The Black Reavers, battered but unbroken, were gathered nearby, their strange assortment of weapons and armor a stark contrast to the polished, but now nearly useless, equipment of the colony soldiers. Commander Rex leaned against a wall, cleaning his railgun with methodical precision. His one good eye caught hers, and he smirked. Don't look so grim, sweetheart, he said. We're still breathing. That's something. Ilara sighed. For now. But if we don't take out that fleet, Cartha 9 is finished. Captain Darius Ward joined them, his cybernetic arm whirring as he adjusted its settings. We've bought ourselves time, but it won't last. The Zarthish will come at us with everything they've got. They'll regret it, Rex said, his grin widening. We've got a plan. The room fell silent as everyone turned to face Rex. Ilara folded her arms. Let me guess. Another of your insane schemes? Rex chuckled. You're catching on. But this one's a masterpiece. The Zarthish fleet is centralized. Their flagship coordinates their operations. We take it out, and the rest of the fleet will be blind. Darius frowned. And how exactly do you plan to take out a ship that size? Our ground-based weapons don't have the range, and our fighters were destroyed days ago. Rex's grin turned devilish. We steal one of theirs. The plan was as reckless as it was audacious. Infiltrate the Zarthish forward base, hijack a dropship, and use it to board the flagship. From there, they would disable the ship's core, triggering a chain reaction that would obliterate it, and hopefully take the rest of the fleet with it. Ilara couldn't believe she was going along with it, but desperation left little room for argument. If they failed, there would be no one left to care. The infiltration team consisted of Ilara, Darius, Rex, and a small group of Reavers, including Vega and Ortiz. The dropship they needed was heavily guarded, nestled within a Zarthish outpost teeming with alien soldiers. The group approached under the cover of darkness, their movements swift and silent. Eyes up, Rex whispered. This place is crawling. Ilara's heart pounded as they crept closer. The outpost was a nightmare of alien architecture, its twisted spires and glowing conduits pulsating like living organisms. Zarthish warriors patrolled the area, their insectoid forms casting long shadows. Vega took point, her cybernetic eye scanning for weak points in the enemy's defenses. She gestured toward a gap in the patrols, and the team slipped through, their footsteps muffled by the alien terrain. The dropship loomed ahead, its sleek, organic design gleaming under the eerie light. Ortiz approached it, his fingers dancing over a handheld device. "Give me a minute to bypass the security," he said, his voice low. The team held their breath as he worked. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the dropship's hatch hissed open. "Done," Ortiz said with a grin. "Let's move." The team piled into the dropship, Rex taking the pilot seat. He gripped the controls with practiced ease, his cocky demeanor replaced by a rare focus. "Buckle up," Rex said. "This ride's gonna get bumpy." The dropship lifted off, its engines humming with an otherworldly energy. Alarms blared as the Zarthish realized what was happening, but Rex was already maneuvering the ship away from the outpost, weaving through the enemy's defenses with reckless abandon. "Hold on!" Rex shouted as the dropship plunged toward the flagship. Plasma fire streaked past them, the Zarthish scrambling to intercept. But Rex's piloting was maddeningly precise, each twist and turn narrowly avoiding destruction. The flagship loomed larger with every second, its hull bristling with weapons and alien markings. Ilara's stomach churned as they approached, the dropship angling toward an open docking bay. "This is it," Rex said. "Brace for impact." The dropship slammed into the docking bay with a bone-rattling crash. Alarms wailed as Zarthish guards swarmed the area, their weapons raised. Ilara and the team leapt out, firing before their boots hit the ground. The battle was chaos. Plasma bolts filled the air, the acrid scent of burned flesh and metal choking the room. Ilara's rifle barked out bursts of fire, each shot finding its mark. Darius tore through the enemy ranks, his cybernetic arm a blur of destruction. The Reavers fought with their usual blend of precision and madness, their unorthodox weapons wreaking havoc. "Clear a path," Rex shouted. "We've got to reach the core." The team pushed forward, their movements synchronized despite the chaos. They fought through wave after wave of Zarthish, their determination unyielding. Finally, they reached the flagship's core, a massive, pulsating structure that radiated an intense heat. Ortiz approached the core, his hands already working to plant explosives. "I need 2 minutes," he said, sweat dripping down his face. "Make it 1, Darius growled, firing at an approaching squad of Zarthish. The team formed a defensive line, holding off the enemy as Ortiz worked. Ilara's arms ached, her body screaming for rest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. "Charges are set," Ortiz shouted. "Let's move." The team began their retreat, fighting every step of the way. The ship shook violently as the explosives detonated, the core's destruction triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. Fire and debris rained down around them as they sprinted for the dropship. "Get us out of here," Ilara yelled as they piled into the dropship. Rex didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the controls, and the ship rocketed out of the docking bay. Behind them, the flagship erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave rippling through the Zarthish fleet. Smaller ships were caught in the blast, their hulls shattering like glass. The team watched in awe as the flagship disintegrated, the once dominant fleet now a broken shadow of its former self. Cheers erupted in the dropship, the realization of their victory washing over them. Ilara slumped in her seat, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She glanced at Rex, who was grinning despite the blood streaking his face. "Not bad," Ilara said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Not bad," Rex echoed. "Sweetheart, we just saved the day." "That's more than not bad," Darius chuckled, his usual grim demeanor softened by the moment. "I'll admit, you lunatics pulled it off." The dropship descended toward the colony, the battlefield below eerily quiet. The Zarthish forces, now leaderless and disoriented, were retreating. Cartha 9 had been saved, For now. As they disembarked, the survivors gathered to greet them, their cheers echoing through the air. For the first time in weeks, there was hope. Ilara looked at Rex, her expression thoughtful. So, what now? Rex shrugged, his grin unwavering. We'll find another fight. There's always another fight. Ilara nodded, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. She knew the war wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The war had been lost until ruthless human soldiers showed up. And against all odds, they had turned the tide.